Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is brought to you by, well, you. If you want to learn how to support our show, go to patreon.com/laststandmedia. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols Plus, a PlayStation podcast supplement. This is episode number 156. My name is Colin Moriarty. I'm joined as always by my sons, Chris Raygun and Dustin Furman. Chris, let's go to you first. How are you today, my friend?
I'm doing all right. Woke up to some interesting news that we're going to be getting into, but it's been a pretty slow day other than that. That was definitely the most interesting thing today.
Oh, I would say so. It's going to be the most interesting thing for a while, I think. Dustin, how are you?
I'm great. I actually had an in-person business meeting today, which I don't know if I've ever done. I mean, Colin, you and I have had dinners and such, but so that was cool. Just some stuff in the works.
Yeah,
and then just staying very, very productive. A lot of things happening. Colin, you said the other day, we're firing at all cylinders. And I think this podcast is kind of the example of that. We're ready to go at a moment's notice.
Yeah, we certainly are. It's funny because we actually had a really awesome, and we still do have a really awesome episode of Sacred Symbols Plus. We're actually starting to stack them where they're becoming so good and so tantalizing, I'm not sure what order to even publish them in anymore. So they've all gotten bumped now, one, because of this news today. And obviously we're going to be focusing on this just mega announcement that Microsoft is working to acquire by fiscal year 2023 Activision-Blizzard, the publisher, which includes King as well. So Activision-Blizzard King for $68.7 billion, or about 10 times more than they paid for ZeniMax. About 9 times more than they paid for ZeniMax. It's funny you say this, Chris, about waking up to the news. So I sleep in, I go to bed fairly late. I get into bed between 11 and 12, but then we just stay up and we like just watch TV and dick around or whatever. So I wake up, and then I wake up really anxious. My anxiety works in reverse to most, where people's anxiety often gets worse throughout the day. I wake up like a bundle of anxiety, and then I just have to lay there for a while.
Me too.
Just kind of, and then it gets through. Like by nighttime, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm golden. I'm fucking good to go by nighttime. So I got up, and what's funny is that I actually had to set an alarm this morning because on Tuesdays I have a call with this. I consult with this Israeli company, and we talk at 10 in the morning Eastern, which is 5 o'clock in Tel Aviv. So I had to get up for that, and so I just got up and used the bathroom, and then I was coming back to bed and kind of like combobulating, and Micah was like, "Oh, you're awake? Microsoft bought Activision," and I was like, "What?" And like I was like, what kind of stupid joke is that? And then I was like going to go off on my business. And then it ended up obviously being true. And I was almost late for my meeting because I got totally distracted by the news. So that's ended up being how my morning has gone. And ever since then, I've just been thinking about it.
For me, it's funny because Chris, so I woke up around just before 9 or around 9. And I, as everyone does now, as you look at your phone, the first thing, I was like, what the fuck? Chris Raygun. I have a text from him before I wake up. What is what's going on here?
Very rare.
Yeah. Like, damn.
Well, he was on it, and now we're on it. We have much to discuss here. But the deal is just that. Microsoft announced on their own website and on Xbox Wire, et cetera, that they are welcoming in these incredible teams. It says, welcoming the incredible teams and the legendary franchises of Activision Blizzard to Microsoft Gaming. And he says, Phil says, in part, quote, as a team, we are on a mission to extend the joy and community of gaming to everyone on the planet. We all know that gaming is the most vibrant and dynamic form of entertainment worldwide, and we've experienced the power of social connection and friendship that gaming make possible. As we pursue that mission, it is incredibly exciting to announce that Microsoft has agreed to acquire Activision Blizzard. And he goes on and on. Now, this brings a series of major franchises and studios into Microsoft's first party. The franchises, the 6 major ones that they actually outline on Microsoft's messaging is Overwatch, Diablo, Call of Duty, obviously, World of Warcraft, Candy Crush, and StarCraft. But actually, our friends at Video Game Chronicle put together a pretty extensive list of all of the IP that will move. And amongst the franchises are Blur, Crash Bandicoot, DJ Hero, Geometry Wars, Guitar Hero, Hearthstone, Heroes of the Storm, Hexen, King's Quest, The Lost Vikings, Pitfall, Police Quest, Prototype, Chris, for you, Quest for Glory, Singularity, a game I loved from Raven, Skylanders, the old series Soldier of Fortune, Space Quest, Spyro, StarCraft, the old Tenchu games, they don't own the IP anymore, Time Shift, Tony Hawk, True Crime, and all the Warcrafts. So
Yeah.
this is a substantial deal. And before we get into the mechanics of it, I think we have to split it up in multiple ways. Like I wrote down in my notes, there's almost a personal take on it. Then I think there's a take for Sony. Then I think there's a take for Microsoft. And then I think there's a take for the gamer and the industry, which might be of the same, but probably not. And then there's probably more perspectives even to examine it from. I'll save myself for last. Chris, I'll let you go first. What are your thoughts here, your top level thoughts about reading this today?
Yeah, I mean, on the surface level, we've had conversations on this show about consolidation and how we felt that Bethesda was probably the biggest publisher that Microsoft could acquire without rustling the jimmies of the greater industry. And I think that's proven today because I've seen a lot of takes today being like, this is not good for the industry. There are obviously people who are excited because these kinds of things are kind of inherently exciting. It is interesting, no doubt. But I've seen a lot more people cry out about this than they did about Bethesda. And it's because it's a huge thing. Call of Duty is the highest selling game like every year. And now it's under Microsoft's umbrella. The highest selling game on PlayStation consoles every year is now a Microsoft game. That's hilarious. That's insane. I never once thought that this would happen, but my surface level takes are, I'm not happy to see this level of consolidation happening. It feels monopolistic, especially at this point after they've acquired two major publishers. We still don't really know how this is going to affect franchises like Call of Duty. With Bethesda, it was a little bit more open-ended because you had Fallout and Skyrim, and those released once every 7 years. But now that they're acquiring an annualized franchise that has a large history on PlayStation, will those go exclusive? That's actually a conversation to have because I'm not so sure. I'm not so certain they will. I feel like it's negative for the industry, but at the same time, there's part of me that's like, I'm glad that Tencent didn't get to them first. I'm glad that in some way, this kind of ensures a future for a lot of franchises that have been kind of dormant and dying under Activision's umbrella. Things like Spyro and Crash, which deserved more than one shot, will undoubtedly get shine again now that they're under like new leadership, and Microsoft is going to want to pump all that IP into Game Pass as much as possible. I don't know. I'm feeling largely mixed, mostly negative. Just because, again, this feels just a bit like a Disney thing. This feels like Disney has acquired your parents, and it's like, great. But that's the kind of overall feeling I have right now. It feels monopolistic, but the silver lining is I think there's a lot of franchises that I would be happy to see come back again that now have a way, way, way bigger chance of seeing the light of day.
What do you think, Dustin?
I don't think that my take differs too much from Chris's. In fact, I think Chris just brought up some things that are really interesting points that I didn't think about. Specifically, I guess we're looking at a positive point. If you look at a lot of these Blizzard IP, a lot of people thought that they were going down, particularly with Overwatch 2, the downfall of World of Warcraft, some up in the air aspects about the new Diablo. And so there was a lot of concern for fans of those IP, how Blizzard was handling them. And especially kind of the downfall of Blizzard since their merge with Activision. So a silver lining in some way is that, yeah, maybe Microsoft with all their money can figure out how to get these IPs back on track. But as Chris was saying, the consolidation of the industry is not something to cheer for, in my opinion. And it's not like Xbox is eliminating the competition with PlayStation. We're not there yet, but we want to be careful about these things. And so I don't know. I would say that Pandora's box has been opened with this one, but it really was already opened with Bethesda. I just think that we didn't expect it to be this big and this soon, but here we are.
Yeah, interesting. I think you guys both have interesting takes on this, and I have a lot to say, but I
Yeah.
think, again, we have to talk about it from just multiple perspectives. And I should note that I'm a Microsoft shareholder, so you can take that for what you will. But from a personal perspective, I was telling Mike, I'm like, I feel like Neo in The Matrix, dodging bullets, right? Every acquisition that occurs, it's like, oh, I don't, whatever. This actually on a personal level, like a personal gamer level. Let's say that they stripped Activision away from PlayStation, which I don't think is going to happen. But let's say that happens. I'm like, well, I don't. Okay, again, I just feel like for me, these bullets are not hitting me,
Right.
because it's not the stuff I play, and I feel very fortunate because it could have gone the other way, where it's like I'm really into Bethesda. I'm really into Call of Duty or something.
Well, tomorrow Microsoft's going to acquire Konami, and then Colin's going to cry.
I'll kill myself. So I feel like people are waking up, millions of people, and they're PlayStation gamers, and they're like, what the fuck just happened? Because I play Call of Duty, or I play Overwatch, or whatever. And so from a personal gamer perspective, like just how I interact with games and the games I play, it doesn't really affect me. And I need to say that because it's kind of the honest truth. But I think it's also important to not speak from just a very myopic standpoint.
Right.
This deal is disastrous from so many perspectives that have nothing to do with me as a gamer, but have to do with the industry and game accessibility and the tenor that this kind of deal sets for the industry and for its competitors like Sony and Nintendo. I beg someone to tell me why this is good.
Because
Like,
Game Pass.
What is?
That's what they say. I'm just saying, like, I'm ready for it.
But we're gonna just change everything about the industry and consolidate everything because people don't want to buy games anymore, and now they want to have Game Pass. So we're gonna just change the entire economic reality of everything now, and we're gonna do it by brute force. Not gonna do it through naturalistic means or sensical acquisitions. We're just gonna brute force change the way games operate as an industry. And I was writing in my notes that we've had companies, including Microsoft, that have come in and taught really meaningful lessons to the industry and also changed the way companies approached the industry at large and their products. And I think about Atari, right? And how they lost sight of quality, and they didn't understand that it was quality that was really going to matter to games in the home, that people can go to the arcade and play these superior games. They don't need games that were made in 4 weeks like they were getting on Atari 2600. And it killed them, right? It killed that version of Atari. And Nintendo is the one that came in and said, no, we're going to teach the industry that quality matters, IP matter, consistency matters, fun and joy, love of the game matter. And I think when Sony came in, I think they reminded everyone technology matters. I think that they saw a really stagnant competitor focused on the wrong company in Sega, right? Nintendo obviously focused on Sega, the wrong company. And Sony's like, oh, what do developers really want? Oh, they want CD. They want digital media and faster streaming and more RAM. And we'll take Squaresoft's games. Yeah. We'll take Final Fantasy, and we'll take the shooters, and they came in and proved that. And then I think Microsoft came in and they proved that community and interconnectivity mattered. Their pioneering work on Xbox Live, 2002, 2003, the availability of digital games. They were on the forefront of this. Remember, and we've talked about it in the past, it was a major risk and a very forward-thinking move to say we're going to put an Ethernet cable port only in our console in 2001.
Yeah, broadband.
It's a big deal, right? Yeah, broadband. And they tried to do the same thing to a lesser extent with Xbox 360 by saying this thing doesn't connect to Wi-Fi because you need the stable connectivity. And remember, you had to buy that separately. And then they built it in later. So Microsoft has been a pioneering force in making things better. But now I think Microsoft is becoming a pioneering force, if you will, that has total malign influence on the industry. And it needs to be called out. And what it reminds me most of is Apple. Apple came in and fucked the economics of games up forever. And no one really talks about that, right? We still buy games off of shelves. They're selling more than ever. But who do you owe the microtransaction to? Who do you owe the little expansion packs and the costumes and all of these things and the prevalence of all of that? You owe it to Apple and what they did to the economics of games. And it destroyed thousands of studios. And along the way, a lot of creativity was sucked out, and you got some big games. We make fun of it on the show sometimes. Like, did you play Monument Valley? You know, it's like the same like 5 games for the last 10 years, right? And that's what they did. And yeah, they reap Apple Arcade and all this reaps hand over fist money, but it's not good money. It's what Cog would say. Not every bag's a good bag, right? And Apple did that to the industry. And Microsoft, by leveraging its money, is now forcing a subscription model into, it's like a square into a circular hole. It doesn't necessarily make sense, and it's not necessarily what people want. And that malign influence, I think, is quite corrosive, because now Sony can't ignore this. Sony has to understand it's dealing with a competitor that has no problem taking shit away from it. And that's not the way that and remember, this goes back to the beginning. No offense to Microsoft, but what was their first instinct in the 90s when Xbox started to come to fruition? What did they try to do? They went and tried to buy Nintendo. That's the first thing they did. And this feels pretty similar to me, where it just seems like, oh, we're not going to thoughtfully move the ball forward. We're going to fucking force it. And maybe it's up to Micah keeps saying this to me today as we talk about it. She's like, well, this is capitalism, dude. This is the economics of the situation. And I'm like, no doubt.
Yeah.
But like, no doubt. But are we really of the mind that all capitalistic enterprise is positive and that the consumer always wins and that there won't be unintended consequences from this? Because what I fear most about this is what it forces Sony to have to consider doing. And it's stuff that I don't want them to do. There's never going to be a reality when I wake up and they buy Square Enix or Capcom and I'm going to be like, yes. I'm going to be like, that sucks. That's the antithesis of what I want. I don't want more mergers and acquisitions. Someone asked me like on Discord, how should Sony respond? And I'm like, the way they should respond is to say, look, we're going to fund 20 new teams all around the world. They're going to work on Sony properties and Sony exclusives. That's our response. See you in a few years. Right. And, but they can't respond like that. When someone's hitting them with haymakers, I don't understand how they can just stand pat. And some would say like, well, their third-party exclusives are one angle of that. And I would agree. It's the safe route because, as I've said before, when you get Final Fantasy 16, that's a low-risk endeavor. That's a low-risk thing for you. What about when you buy the studio that makes Final Fantasy 16? How much more of a risk does that become? So there's so many different angles. I'm not even sure exactly how to cogently break that down. But Chris, does any of that resonate with you?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense. I don't know. I do think this is just kind of, hey man, money talks and people listen. Like, who the hell is going to say no to $67 billion? You'd have to be an absolute lunatic. You have to just not know. You would have to not know what numbers mean to say no to that.
Actually, it's funny you say that because someone wrote. I saw it circulating somewhere on Twitter. Maybe it was a retweet from someone saying like that people are rounding it to like, oh, it's 70 billion. And it's like, do you have any idea that the rounding between the sum and 20 billion is like half the value of ZeniMax? Like that, you can't round that number. It's not like rounding from $70 to $75.
It's almost so big of an amount that it's almost meaningless.
It's funny.
Like the difference between 67 and 70 billion is that alone is an insane number, like by itself. Just the difference between people's rounding of the estimation. That is life-changing money for the overwhelming majority, like 99.96% of the population, probably.
Oh my God, more than that. That's life-changing money for everyone, even the richest people in the world. That would double some of the richest people's.
Right. It's insane.
So
it's an insane. This is an insane acquisition, and it's one of those things where I know we have this conversation sometimes on the show about the moral imperative of that exists kind of underneath, especially when we're talking about Tencent. You know, that is when it comes up the most, is the moral imperative to kind of accept quote unquote good money. But at the end of the day, man, everything's got a price, and we're seeing it now. Like, who the hell is going to say no? Activision's not going to say no, especially in the situation they're in right now. They're probably that's another angle. That's another angle too that I feel like isn't necessarily being brought up that much, is the position that Activision is currently in, which is not a good one. They're still selling tons of games. Call of Duty's still doing super well, but it's doing the worst it's ever done. Their CEO is embroidered in this whole scandal where he threatened to kill a person. It's not a good look. And WoW is failing, and Diablo is a mess. Overwatch 2 is baffling in its very concept and existence. They're just in this kind of, it's very strange to say that they're struggling, because they're not literally struggling, but they're not in a good place. And this is very obviously probably the message from the board being like, hey, this is our way out.
Well, I was going to say
we're going to get crazy rich, and we get to offload all this baggage, and then Microsoft gets to rehabilitate that baggage into shit that's going to work for them. Win-win. We're done.
At $68.7 billion, it comes out to $95 a share, which is 45% more than its market value. So that's another thing, is that's the kind of monopolistic shit too that happens, where it's like, oh yeah, we're not going to pay you a sensical amount of money. We're going to way overpay for this, just like they did with ZeniMax. Now, again, this is an economics of scale, but I don't like, these things don't happen in a vacuum, and therefore, for as great as this is and a boon as this is for Microsoft, no doubt. I mean, no doubt. What an amazing thing for Microsoft.
They're happy.
Yeah, but
for sure.
But it can't simply be looked at, again, myopically, or looked at in these limited means, because this is insane amounts of money slinging around. Do you have anything to add, Dustin, before I bring it to some new topics?
That was what Chris brought up, was actually something that I was thinking as well, is just that in both of these big purchases, we see Microsoft coming in and buying companies that maybe are falling on hard times. We talked about how Bethesda was shopping out Starfield, and how we saw time and time again their games not necessarily hitting sales expectations or what they would have liked. And so I just wonder, like, how early do you think this deal started? When was the discussion?
Last year. I would say it's funny you say that, because I was actually reading a Phil Spencer thing, and he said, where did he say this? Oh yeah, on January 10th, 8 days ago, when asked about doing business with Activision, he said, we have changed how we do certain things with them, and they're aware of that, end quote. So like they were talking about the sexual things and the stuff with Kotick and all that.
The misconduct.
The misconduct, right. And that's the sexual things, the sexual misconduct. And that's why I feel like this has more of a moral angle. I'm kind of curious, Dustin, about what you think of this, where, and I the way I put it in my notes was, the reward that Activision-Blizzard King gets for its apparent heinous conduct throughout the industry and over time is $68.7 billion at $95 a share, 45% over their value. And by the way, Kotick stays until the merger is complete. So for maybe a year and a half or 2 years. So I never want to hear moralistic grandstanding from him, Phil Spencer, and that fucking image that they put out where it showed the whole leadership position with their pronouns in it and stuff. Save it. I definitely don't want to hear that shit from Microsoft anymore about your forward-thinking social politics, when Activision-Blizzard, like you said, is totally a wounded animal, so therefore is vulnerable and does need new ownership, and this does give the board a way out. But let's not act like Microsoft is just an amoral figure in this. They're making a moral choice to empower, embolden, and enrich the people at Activision in order to get their games. And that is a moral question, and that does come at a cost. That's not very different from the malign influence we talk about with Tencent in its own way. It's like you're emboldening that. Like this is not a penalty. So I definitely don't want to hear any of that from Microsoft anymore. That's my take. I don't know if you guys agree.
I feel like some people will see this and have the perspective of, thank God Xbox can come in and reform Activision-Blizzard. You know, they're the girl that says, I can change him, you know, like something like that.
Yeah.
But I think that what you brought up, Colin, is a fantastic point that I don't know if a lot of people will think about, is that you're right. The people that got them into this situation are the biggest winners at the end of the day.
You want to talk about golden parachutes? Why don't you talk about like platinum diamond parachutes that these guys are all going to get as they jump out screaming of the fire that they've created, just so Game Pass can get Call of Duty. That's good. You know, I mean, that's the kind of, we got to call it what it is. I always say it with Disney. I say it with the NBA. I don't like when these companies are talking out of both sides of their mouths, and I have to call that out. Sony getting, I don't like Sony's proximity to Tencent in some of the companies they own. They're dwelling with them in Discord. They're dwelling with them in other places, Epic.
Right.
And if Sony were to be acquired by Tencent, which by the way, I think is possible. I don't think that would necessarily happen, but I think that that's not beyond the realm of possibility, frankly. We would have to, by nature, just hold their feet to the fire on a constant basis. Like we would have to really bring it to them. So it's interesting, Dustin, you say that you're not going to hear a lot of people bring it up, because they should. If you're an honest person who covers Microsoft and Xbox, then you must bring up the moralistic angle, even if it's not going to change the equation for you. Just like Tencent buying Sony would be tragic, but it's not going to stop me from playing PlayStation. That's what I do. It's what we do for a living. But we're going to make sure it is what it is and seen as for what it is. And I don't want to let that be swept under the rug, because I do think that is an important, although maybe not relevant to the economics of it, an important nonetheless feature of it that I don't know. Will people ignore that? Will people be like, oh, it's just someone else? But it's just all the same people, really, with just some of the heads gone that are just have gratuitous generational wealth now. So I have a problem with that. But Chris, let me kick this one over to you.
Sure.
My big takeaway for Microsoft, as we said, is that this is no doubt good for them. It's good for their brand. It creates good buzz. Game Pass is just at 25 million subscribers now. It's doing really great. By the way, I had my first interaction. If people hadn't listened to the last episode of Sacred Symbols, I got Game Pass because I was playing Halo. So I played Halo 1, and then I immediately canceled Game Pass.
This is your fault.
Yeah, no, I
Phil
totally
was in the Discord and he's like,
shit about it too. I was like,
motherfucker.
yeah, they even gave me my $1 back. I was like, oh, okay. So, this is obviously a massive win for them. Optically, it's a win for them. I think there's more mechanics to this, way more mechanics. Like the question of, can they even manage this many studios? What does the production pipeline look like? But this puts them in a position where they can release potentially a AAA game every 2 months now. I mean, it used to be, I think, every 3 to 3.5 months. You probably could expect that with their old makeup. However, I think that this move puts Sony in a position where they must probably feel like they need to respond. And how Sony responds to this is kind of a red herring, because companies don't respond. They're not like meeting today being like, we got to buy this now, and then they're going to announce it tomorrow. It just doesn't work like that. But culturally, they're going to have to kind of shift what I think they're willing to do. And I'm wondering how you think you may expect them to respond, because I feel like they look weak right now. And that might not matter in the long game and to the greater picture, but I think it matters a lot now. I feel like I've covered Sony professionally for a really long time. Sony hasn't been like this since 2008, 2009, 2010. Like it feels like that era. And that was a fun era, but that was a bad era for Sony. So what do you think?
Yeah, I will say I feel like maybe it looks worse than it is. I actually don't think Sony is in that bad shape. We still got Horizon on the horizon. We still got God of War also on the horizon. Not much of a pun there, but I think Sony's still looking good. I just think the overwhelming difference in wealth and scale of these two companies is becoming more and more apparent. I don't think that's necessarily a negative thing for Sony. If anything, I think it's a positive thing for Sony, because they're still selling those. Well, I mean, the PS5 is still way, way, way ahead of Series X and Series S, despite the fact that they are so much smaller. I think it almost looks more impressive in some ways. And they're not faltering on games quite yet. There could be a point where that happens in the near future where Sony puts out a first party title with like a mainstay IP behind it, and it's in the 70s, or that's possible. I don't see that happening for a while. But I would express just maybe lower the sirens a little bit. I don't think it's that bad. But I do think that they are going to have to respond in some way, or they're probably going to have to reevaluate how they're going to maybe keep their relationships with third parties open now that so many of the third parties that they deal with are their primary first party competitor. I think that's definitely going to shift the way they do business. I wonder if this is going to affect Spartacus at all.
We'll talk about. I want to save that for next question, because
right.
That's a whole nother thing that I want to get into as well, because you touch on some interesting points in terms of, stumbling and Sony's kind of the trend of quality, which I think is their ace in the hole. It's actually becoming their only advantage now at this point, which is maybe the most important advantage, but of an advantage that is certainly going to get eroded, because I agree that the Activision purchase in and of itself, no single publisher or acquisition is going to be able to sink or kill PlayStation. PlayStation is a mighty brand. It's a very mighty brand. PlayStation makes way more money than Xbox does per gross revenue. It's a bigger brand. It's a more important brand. But that doesn't have to stay this. That's not static. That's not just a static question and answer. And I think the death by 1,000 cuts, especially as the cuts become more deep and more gratuitous, is a problem. And Dustin, I'm wondering, what do you think Sony will do, or what do you think they'll react? How do you think they'll react? Because I think there are certain entities now that are very much in play and for them. And I really don't want them to do it, but I feel like they're going to. And I wonder if you feel the same and what those entities might be in your opinion.
Right. I feel like the way they react is, like you said, they're not going to announce tomorrow that they're buying Square Enix or Capcom or something like that. But I was in the car earlier with Ben, and I was like, man, like, this is the type of situation, like you implied earlier, Colin, that I could see Sony feeling like we need, now that we've been punched 2 times, we should try to buy a publisher like Square Enix or something. And again, that's something that I would not like to see at all. It doesn't go, the feeling of consolidation is not exclusively anti towards Microsoft. It's industry wide. But as far as their reaction, I feel like there's a big factor of what games remain on PlayStation as a platform. And it's so funny just because we just got out of this conversation, I feel like, with Bethesda games. Will they be exclusive? Will they not be? And honestly, it got real fucking annoying just because people got really toxic around just the question, the what your answer is. And so
can I cut in here real quick?
Yeah, cut in for a sec.
I wanted to say that what's funny about that question that you're bringing up about the exclusivity is that the price suggests both answers can be true.
Right.
Like that's so it doesn't solve any problems at all,
So if we read the press release, here's the one line we get. It says Activision-Blizzard games are enjoyed on a variety of platforms, and we plan to continue to support those communities going forward. And here's the thing. We are not going to know about exclusivity for any of these IPs for as long as humanly possible. And this is to Microsoft's advantage. If you are a hardcore Call of Duty fan and you don't own a next-gen console, and you know that Microsoft just bought Activision, then the platform of choice may be up in the air for you.
Well, you'd be a fool. I mean, frankly, I have to say you'd be an absolute fool not to migrate if that's your main game.
Right.
There should be no trust that these things will remain, because I do think that Phil has talked out of both sides of his mouth with the Bethesda purchase, and it's happening. It's going to happen again with this, as because they probably don't even know the answer, really.
Right.
Yeah, not yet.
And that's the thing. And that's where it comes back to what Sony does, is that, let's put out hypotheticals. Let's say Call of Duty is an Xbox exclusive going forward, and maybe Warzone remains or something like that.
Yeah.
Think about the revenue cut that Sony gets from Call of Duty every year, 30% off every copy, digital, and also, of course, the cut on physical. That is a lot of money. That is an insane amount of money just in that game alone. And it's not that that's the only thing, but I think that that's something to consider when the number one game on your platform has the possibility of going away. That can definitely change what your plans are, your financial income.
I look at it. Well, first of all, that's true, and it goes back to the whole idea of nothing happening in a vacuum. That these are offensive moves. These are not neutral moves because they cut into Sony's territory. That's why I don't like where this puts Sony. I don't like that that Sony is gonna have to respond with a punch of its own, because it's against the whole mantra that I wish that they operated under, which was let's just build things and create partnerships and incubate them. And I just think that they're out of time. And this is a problem for them. And I think the primary objective, or not the objective, because I really hope these things never happen. I don't want this to happen. I really don't. I hope Sony does what I want them to do, which is to say, like, we're just going to continue to invest in new teams, because these kinds of acquisitions suggest that there is a limited or finite amount of resources, which is technically true, but feasibly, really, it's not. Just go into the mine and get new resources. You have to just incubate and do the hard work and the legwork. And Sony has typically been willing to do that by either, like Firesprite was a studio that they kind of just silently worked with. Media Molecule was a studio they silently worked with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sucker Punch, Insomniac over many years. But I think time's up. And if they are going to survive, and I want to talk about Spartacus in a minute, they might need to look at these things, because they are playing with a competitor that's saying, oh, we're not interested in, like, yeah, they bought Media Molecule, but they made Little Big Planet. That was already exclusive, right? Or you bought Firesprite, but they made, the Persistence, which was already exclusive. These are offensive moves where it's saying, we're buying all of this stuff and we're taking it. And you're not going to have it anymore. And we're doing it to you again. And maybe Sony, unfortunately, needs to step up and say, okay, I guess we're going to have to do that, and I don't want that to happen, because I think it creates an arms race that when this all settles, it's not going to be pretty, I don't think. And but I do think that they are going to be like, fine, we're going to buy Square Enix. And I think Square Enix and Sega, by the way, are the two targets that I would look at if I were them, if that was the mindset that they had. Chris, you wanted to say something?
No, I was going to say, I mean, it's kind of the thing. It's what is. I was talking a little bit earlier about the difference in scale of these two companies, these two parent companies, specifically Microsoft and Sony. Microsoft is a behemoth. It's hilarious how it is. I really need everybody in the audience to understand that $1 billion is by itself really, really inconceivable for your average person. Like I would argue, if one person saw $1 billion bills, they would be fucking flabbergasted. They would lose their fucking minds. You'd be in a padded room somewhere the second you saw that, because it's not conceivable. 68 billion of those rooms. That is not the level that Sony is competing at. And that's not to say that hinders quality at all. I'm just saying, realistically, the options that they have to fight back are a lot smaller than Microsoft has. Microsoft could tomorrow be like, yeah, we'll get Capcom. They could just do that. The only reason that they haven't done it is because they just haven't done it. That's literally the only reason why they have not made that move. They have the capacity to do that, which is terrifying if you're Sony.
Definitely, because, well, I think it's terrifying, extra terrifying, Chris. Sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to say, I think it's extra terrifying because Microsoft seems to be, maybe tangentially or not, targeting the very partners that Sony is pursuing. So Sony was pursuing heavily Bethesda games, and then Microsoft was like, no, we'll buy them, right? And then Sony has a Call of Duty partnership, and obviously everything has been going great with Activision and Sony for some time now. And then Microsoft was like, no, we'll just come and take that. And obviously the next partners are Square Enix, Capcom, and so on and so forth. I feel like this is going to test the bounds, though, for me, of my theory that there is some sort of cultural question, that the Japanese companies understand what is happening here, and maybe Sony can come to them and be like, we need to get together in order to kind of protect ourselves from these influences. But at the same time, you're right, Chris, they could also just go to Capcom and be like, we'll give you twice what you're worth. I mean, why would you say no and be like, oh, because we're Japanese? I mean, that's
no, exactly.
but I do think that there are probably some relevant ties there, because remember, Microsoft, the story about Microsoft going and trying to buy Nintendo is that Nintendo laughed at them. Like literally, they flew them to Tokyo, brought them there, laughed in their faces, put them on a plane, and sent them back. And clearly, Microsoft could have had Nintendo. I mean, they weren't going to do it. So it's not only a question of money.
That's true.
But it is certainly, I mean, the be all end all at the end of the day. Dustin, do you think the targets are logically the big Japanese publishers? Maybe you would consider some of the developers as well, although Katakawa owns all this random shit like From Software, and they have Chinese investment. You have stuff like Arc System Works. I don't know what buttress there really is for them to kind of create a wall around them and start getting their own content. If they need to lock this content down, if they're playing again with a competitor that's taking things away, then they, I don't want to say you must, because I really don't want the arms race to begin, but then they're logically going to say like, okay, then and that's what I'm saying. Those are the rules. I don't want those rules because I think it causes destruction.
Right. Yeah. Well, I guess that is the question, is that like when you spend this much money, and this is where my knowledge as far as the economics of how big Microsoft is, like who's next? Are they going to try to buy 2K? Is Rockstar next up? You know what I mean? Like, and so, Colin, this idea of Japanese publishers banding together with mergers and stuff like that is interesting, but again, not the ideal situation on what we would want to see overall. So
it's just more of the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it would just get more and more disastrous. By the way, I will say this, although it's kind of still percolating, is that this is awakening in the political realm some antitrust people. There's no company in the United States that the antitrust people hate more than Microsoft, which has eluded them many times in the past. And I was reading something from Matt Stoller, who is an economics writer today, and they were talking today about like this. And I know Hogue had said it as well, that it's not a 0% chance that the government says you can't do this. And that's the only thing that I think,
really?
Yeah, like that.
It's surprising to me just overall, just because the ownership of this wouldn't be a monopoly.
But it's a vertical integration. And those are the things that, so if you own things, it's like Hollywood. If you own things every step of the way, that monopoly vertical is just as destructive as putting it on its side and making it a horizontal monopoly. It's just a different sort of monopoly. And I think that's what they're worried about, is that Activision-Blizzard is basically a front, not a front, that's a bad word, but it's a front-facing thing towards people as another conduit for them to get their items out that they can make and sell, and they can avoid all commerce outside of Microsoft. And that is a monopoly. Now, I'm not so much of a trust buster, but I did want to throw that out there because I did email with Hogue today and asked him about that. He said it's unlikely, but not a 0% chance. And clearly, if they do this again, then I think that they are really tempting fate at that point. I don't know that they want to mess with the regulators in Washington at a time when populism is growing so much and hate for corporations is at an all-time high, which is, by the way, another reason why I find the celebration of a merger and acquisition like this so peculiar. Yay! It's like Microsoft bought Activision. It's like, what is this fucking economics class? Like I don't know why you would be excited about that necessarily, but
Colin, this is the joke I made earlier, is that a lot of people are looking at this and they're looking at it from a personal viewpoint exclusively, and they think, awesome, I no longer need to buy Call of Duty every year because it's part of my Game Pass subscription, and my team appears to be winning, my corporation, yippee. You know what I mean? Like that's purely the viewpoint of a lot of these people. And I'm thinking, just like, what's the end goal here? Like, do you want a reality where it's just Xbox? Like Xbox eventually buys PlayStation. Is that, and I'm speaking purely to the the
that would
over the top fanboys. Right
that would
now.
be, you know, Dustin and I are both great fans of the crying Wojak meme with the PlayStation hat
Yeah.
on it. We both love that. And in fact, Dustin refuses to put the Xbox version up of it on our Discord because we don't think it's as funny. Like, we think it's funny to just use that as the PlayStation fanboy because it's very accurate for a lot of PlayStation fans and sometimes our very own show, I guess. But I agree. It's like, I like the idea of pursuing another path, like saying, yeah, we're going to do this subscription thing. And that's cool. But I don't like that it comes at the sake of these other things. And that is the inevitability of commerce, but it strikes me where it hurts. And I wrote this because I wanted to make sure I got this. It's not a quote. I just wanted to make sure I said this. I cannot in good conscience, as a developer, a studio owner, a critic, a pundit, and a gamer, I can't endorse this level of mergers and acquisition. We'll have massive consequences. And I do think this will ultimately bend Sony toward the arc of history, as it were. I think we'll bend now towards what Microsoft is doing by nature of its economic heft. And they've done this in the past. Matt Stoller, that guy I was talking about, was writing about how Microsoft has done, you know, the way Microsoft killed Netscape back in the day, the way Microsoft stole Windows basically from Xerox and Apple. And it's really Apple stole it from Xerox and then they stole it from Apple, but it's a calamitous sort of situation. And I feel like it makes Microsoft look like it doesn't. The one thing, let me back up. The one thing I'll say about Microsoft, this is going to be dramatic for a lot of people, but the one thing I'll say about Microsoft, for all the credit I've given them about Game Pass, for the revolutionary nature of Xbox Live and the acquisition of digital games and all of the other things they did for broadband gaming and all of that, has Microsoft ever made a game that, or a series that has resonated with the industry? They went and bought Halo. That wasn't theirs, right? Gears was from Epic and they went and eventually bought the studio responsible for it. Mass Effect wasn't theirs. BioShock wasn't theirs. Titanfall wasn't theirs. And this seems to be a trend. And that's exciting in one way because they know how to go and acquire the talent. They have the money to do that. But in no other way, it feels so hollow. And I can't escape that just as an enthusiast, not as a pundit, not as an analyst, but just as a player of games. I'm like, that is so hollow to me.
No, see,
and
Colin,
yeah, go ahead.
You got it all wrong. Phil, he's a gamer. He's on our side. Don't you remember when he said, when everybody plays, we all win? I mean, come on. Don't you? He's doing this for us. He's doing it for us and our Xboxes and our Game Pass. He's just trying to put more value in there. He's one of us.
I wanted to revisit this, and let you're right, of course.
Which we make fun of Jim Ryan, by the way, also. For anyone out there that's like, yeah.
Jim Ryan sucks. So I did want to go back, though, to ask about what we think will happen with Spartacus. The rumors about Spartacus are interesting because there is indication that maybe they are going to do a full Game Pass facsimile with first-party day one games and stuff. It's so hard for me to imagine that, but I think this is another thing, and I'll throw it to you first, Chris, where, Jesus, does Sony just have to do it now? I don't know how you can continue to stack upon stack upon stack all of these day one games for $15 or whatever, raise it to $20 or something. That's a steal, and it's going to be hard to justify these $70 price points. I don't know, again, with the arc bending towards Microsoft, I don't know that Sony is built for this. I don't know how they really have to rely upon their good name for a little while, and it's going to be a test. And by the way, the games are coming. I mean, Horizon's right around the corner. Gran Turismo, these are going to sell millions of copies. But how are you feeling about Spartacus and what we might see out of it based on these new developments?
Yeah, I mean, I would not be surprised to see that plans for what this service is supposed to be and what it's intended to deliver, I wouldn't be surprised to see those plans maybe shift a little bit. Because, like you said, this is far too big of a thing to ignore. I think Bethesda was also kind of a big thing that was also a wake-up call, in my opinion. I mean, just the ever-encroaching nature of Game Pass in general, even before the Bethesda acquisition, was something to pay attention to from the Sony camp in the first place. So with these two massive deals going through, they're going to have to evaluate some way to compete in a way that at least feels equivalent, because we know they can't do exactly what Game Pass does. Game Pass has a lot of money to just kind of throw around and leverage. But what Sony does have is their first party, and they have the quality first party. And maybe we do get day one subscription oriented releases. Maybe, or at the very least, maybe we get the time between releases and their appearance on Spartacus's platform. Maybe that gets shortened. Maybe that was initially like, oh, maybe like 1 or 2 years maybe into this release cycle, and it'll be on Spartacus. And now maybe that's looking more like maybe a little bit sooner than that. I'm not sure. We're still kind of speculating on what Spartacus even is or what it looks like. We've not seen any UI. We've not seen any proper plans. All we know is that it has a tiered structure. And we know, I think backwards compatibility is pretty much confirmed at this point.
Well, nothing's confirmed, but it's definitely in the patent.
It's a safe bet, I think, in some way, shape, or form. It might not be exactly the way we want it to be, but I'm sure it'll be there.
It'll be the worst possible way you can imagine it.
Yeah, but it'll be there, and that hey man, that's no small thing. That is the one of the primary reasons that I've been playing a lot on my Series X. To be completely frank with you, I've missed a lot of games in that period of time, and now I get to play them at modern resolutions, modern frame rates. It's great. And my library carries. That's really cool. And that is a big sell for, I think, a lot of people who might not even be aware that that's important to them. Having this entire library of games that's actually still really good and really playable, open to you and available to you. That's been a big boon for Microsoft in the early days before Game Pass was really a big thing. And it's just continued to be a good mark on their resume. And if Sony can catch up to that in some way, if they can offer their first party titles through the subscription service in a way that it feels complementary to Game Pass, or in a way that feels competitive with Game Pass, I think that's a good thing. And it's a good step forward. But they're not going to be able to react in kind anytime soon.
No, because
that's kind of,
you got to turn the ship.
This is a massive deal. I really think people need to. I think people really need to think, like, it is, in some ways it's a little funny that Xbox owns Crash Bandicoot and Spyro now. Like those are Xbox IP now.
Yeah, it's really a complete
crazy.
Insult.
That is way beyond. I know that Spyro and Crash haven't been PlayStation IP for a long time, but that to me, as somebody who grew up in the 90s, that is MLB The Show on Game Pass looks like nothing compared to this. Like, in my opinion, those are legacy franchises. That's like if Metal Gear was like an Xbox IP. Like, just because it's not a PlayStation IP now doesn't mean that that's not a sore spot. Or at least, like, from the audience perspective, that's pretty massive. I think that was one of the tweets that I saw going around more regularly than most. It's like, wow, Crash and Spyro are Xbox mascots.
It's
that's crazy.
It is.
Colin.
Yeah, Dustin.
I have a question for you. But if you had a comment on Chris.
No, please.
I just want, so we're talking about, Sony, their reaction. I was thinking we have seen the removal of the PlayStation Now cards. You had the scoop on Sacred Symbols, which I saw. I was looking at Reddit in bed last night, and the first thing I see is the top thing on Gaming Leaks and Rumors is Sacred Symbols, blah, blah, blah. Sony increased marketing spending. So we had that scoop. Do you think that...
Scoop, as Damon would say. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Do you think that Sony... First of all, how long do you think they've known about this? And second is that, do you think that Spartacus in some way has been expedited? Are we seeing them like quickly try to get something off the ground, since we saw, you had that scoop along with the cards? Is that in the table at all, or on the table?
I think Sony doesn't like to build things in the air typically, which I think is wise. Like, they set the stage really slowly. It took them years to set the stage to change names. Remember that? Well, people might not remember my old show, P.S. I Love You. My old PlayStation podcast, I had broken the news, and I had a presentation from a person internally that was like, they're instructing developers to start using this certain thread for names, for PSN names that use an identity number. And this was instead of a name, which was a big move because it allowed them to kind of change all the indices. That was in 2017. And they didn't announce name changes, I think, until 2020. So
Right.
they probably are setting all of this the stage so that when the plane lifts off, they don't have to like abort the mission at the last minute. But I think that there's an urgency there. When did they find out? I think it's entirely possible they found out today.
Ooh.
And that there's always a Chinese wall. Remember, we always talk about how fascinated I was with Insomniac about 10 years ago because they were literally making PS4 and Xbox One games at the same time in the pre-release environment, had them in the same office and had two teams working on them separately and were totally siloed. And we were also talking about how San Diego studio must have had Xbox Series X dev kits before the thing came out. So there's all sorts of weird things where people don't know what's going on and all of this. I wouldn't be surprised if they were hit by this, but I think what this might invoke in them is a fear, like I said, that that push is going to come to shove for them. The other question that I want people to think about is Sony also vulnerable to be purchased by someone? And the answer, I think, is yes.
Yeah.
I think that people are talking about Disney, and I think that that's not a 0% chance that something like that happens. They have a relationship with Sony Pictures, obviously with PlayStation. I don't know. I think that for as much as people are looking at what will Sony do, I also need to look at the other side, which is like, what will companies do to Sony? Because they might be vulnerable right now and looking for some real meaningful partners. As we said, like the Netflix thing might be up in the air. Who knows what's going to happen here? So I think there's a lot of remaining questions. But one thing I wanted to ask you guys, because we touched on it, but we didn't really answer it completely, is do you think that these games will be Xbox exclusive? And what I had said earlier was the price suggests both that it must be Xbox exclusive, but maybe not. Because people often say, oh, at this amount of price with this many subscribers on Game Pass, they're making $300 million a month or whatever. And I'm like, cool. That's great for ZeniMax. But when you're buying a company that's $70 billion or $68 billion, that's a nice revenue, but that's not even doing anything for your bottom line. They're ingesting a whole lot. They're ingesting massive headcount. They're ingesting all of these tools and these locations and this geography and all of this shit. It's going to raise their bottom line a significant amount. And so I feel like I don't know the answer. I think it's even less obvious what's going to be, because it's hard for me. And Dustin, I guess we'll start with you. It's hard for me to imagine that Microsoft is literally going to say, like, we're taking Call of Duty. Come the conclusion of this in fiscal year 2023, we're done, right? That seems so hard to believe that they're going to do that, because it leaves millions and millions of sales on the table. That because some people are going to go and some people aren't. They're just not going to play. But on the other side, if it's all about Game Pass, then all that matters is maximizing it to get that subscription number from 25 million to say 100 million. The problem is that when you're adding cost, that the ceiling raises that you have to reach. And so I think that they both added to that bottom line, but also increased the ceiling that they need to now reach to make this thing work. And so that's maybe a challenge. What do you think?
Yeah. I mean, Call of Duty, of course, is the number one topic of conversation here, the best-selling game of all time. At least I'm pretty sure that's right. Well, not the best-selling series of all time.
Yeah.
So
year over year.
My gut says no, that this will remain on PlayStation, in that you can spend $70 on PlayStation or you can get it on Game Pass, and the insane amount of microtransactions will also go to Sony. It's the other IP that I'm thinking will go to Xbox, specifically like Diablo, Overwatch. I think that those can... Overwatch, though, is different because Overwatch 2 is supposed to be able to be crossplay with Overwatch 1.
Right. Overwatch 2 was announced also, technically, for
Right.
PlayStation, I think.
So that's the question. And Diablo 4, I believe, is also announced for PlayStation, which I don't think they have to. Do they have to honor that? I don't.
No, I don't. They don't have
so.
to honor any of that stuff. No, definitely not. So
yeah.
Not unless they have like a specific deal, and even then, I'm sure there's kill fees and all sorts of things you can do. They can get out of any of these deals. I think that just the Bethesda stuff was too far along, or they probably would have gotten out of that too, and that was just too locked in. Although I think that Sony really got very little out of that deal at the end of the day. But from my take, guys, I want to kind of wrap this up. And Chris, I want to just ask you. Let's end it like this. you walk into the boardroom tomorrow in Tokyo. For some reason, you speak Japanese.
Right.
And they're asking you, Jim Ryan's there and everyone's there, and they're like, what do we do? Or maybe this meeting's happening in San Mateo, California. Who knows? It's happening somewhere. And they say, Chris, what do we do? What do you tell? What is? Let's answer this two ways. What do you think they will do? What should they do?
What do I think Sony will do?
Yeah, and what do you think they should? So what do you think they will do, and what do you think they should do? Two different questions.
I don't think they have anything to this scale to respond with in the short term. So I think in the short term, what they're going to do is they're going to try to buttress Spartacus. They're going to try and hype the shit out of that. And they're probably going to change some plans to make it a little bit more appealing. And I think that's probably what they should do also. Because I don't know what else. I think you could make a case that they could maybe make an announcement that would be like, hey, we are kind of taking a cue from what you said earlier. We are going to invest heavily in building some new studios from the ground up. And that would be probably a positive thing. But at the same time, I don't think it would be I don't think it would be something that would be even considered a response because it's so small in comparison to what just happened. I think the safest and most secure thing that they can do right now is to just buttress and like really nail down this subscription service that they're working on and really make sure that it is as ironclad as possible. Like, because you don't want comparisons going in there that are unfavorable. It's bound to happen in some way just because of the sheer size, but you want Spartacus to offer something that Game Pass does not, at the very, very least. And that is, in my opinion, first party games day and date, because the Xbox first party games aren't the quality of PlayStation first party. I think that backwards compatibility thing is a massive thing too. They might even restructure the tiered system. I would say get rid of the tiered system entirely, or at least make backwards compatibility the base tier. Like, have something there that will expand people's libraries exponentially at a very low cost without having to focus on all of these crazy acquisitions from you don't want to have to spend millions upon millions of dollars securing like the Outer Wilds or something, or some massive cultural darling when you can just reach into your back catalog for ostensibly free and sort of make a case for yourself. I think that is really the only way to come out of this looking good in such a short time.
I'm thinking here about something Sammy Barker said over at Push Square about the day and date stuff, which was a really poignant point that I never really thought of, which is they basically need to commit to doing it day one, or they need to keep the games really far away from it entirely, because you can't telegraph to the audience that it's going to eventually come. Because you can't say like, hey, you get Sony games after 6 months. It's like, okay, then everyone's going to wait 6 months. So they're in this like rock and hard place where they either need to commit or they need to just say, like, we're not doing that. And their tune might have changed significantly since a couple of years ago when Jim Ryan said they're not doing that. Yeah,
their tune has most certainly changed.
Yeah, I would imagine.
we know that because Spartacus exists.
I would imagine.
So like in the first place. Mm-hmm. So, and the industry changing in this way warrants a tune change. You can't just like. There's a point where like, yeah, you can kind of take pride in how consistent you are, but at a certain point, consistency just looks like a failure to react and a failure to stay current and a failure to evolve. And kudos to Sony for not having to succumb to the subscriber or subscription model for this long, but this was always inevitable. Whether Microsoft bought Activision today or in 7 years, we were eventually going to come to a point where subscription models would be the way things were going to go. And if you're going to go this route, don't hold back then. Don't half-ass it, because that's going to be way, 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 way worse than if you just decide to be like, you know what, we're going to compete properly and we're going to offer what what we have, which is the full, the full weight of our creative quality and our creative output. Because anything less, do you really want that comparison?
Yeah, I think I think you're right. I think, Chris, that to be a fly on the wall in the room with the analysts and modelers at Sony would be quite an adventure right now as they try to figure out how the economics of this will work for them. Dustin, what do you think? How do you answer these questions of what you think they might do and what you think they should do, which I have two different answers for, personally.
I hate to be non-specific for what I think they should do, because we could put out a bunch of things. Like they should include their first-party games on this pass if they want to survive. They should buy some key teams, or they should start buying or start building small studios. But I think the key thing that they need to shift now is I don't know if this is the right word, but the attitude. We are still we are back to the cocky Sony era. We saw them change tune between PS3 and PS4, rise to the top, and they're back. Why is it PlayStation the best place to play? Is something that I think that need to ask themselves. Is it great because they nickel and dime you $10 for an upgrade? Stuff like that. Is it the best place to play because they don't communicate with their customers? No. These are very important questions and key areas where Microsoft is just stabbing them over and over again. So Sony, I mean, arguably you should always operate like you're losing. Stop acting like, and I get it. They were the top. They didn't need, they can charge $10. They can do XYZ, not communicate, whatever. But their competitor is not the same as they once were, and they need to figure that out quickly. And I'm sure that this, along with Bethesda, hopefully was a big wake-up call. What will they do? Man, I don't know. Like, I would hate to see a reality where they buy up a studio, like we talked about, like Square Enix, Capcom, maybe From Software, something like that, if they could pull it off.
Bungie.
Whoa.
That would be interesting.
I feel like that's like the most obvious answer, is that they just start making some purchases of their own. But again, that's limited by what they're able to do, by the scale of their company.
Yeah, very well said. I'll leave it here. I think during the ZeniMax situation with Microsoft, I said that there's a line in the sand, and if Microsoft goes over this line with another acquisition, people are going to remember, and it's going to start to turn on them. And I think that this is an inflection point. They will maximize value, and Xbox fans and fanboys and people that use Game Pass and all that will be really into it, and that's great. And it will also attract new customers, which is great. But I think that this puts a lot of alarm in a lot of people, and I think people should pay attention to those in the industry that are not crazy about this, because the unintended consequences of consolidation, of removing competition, of cleaning the battlefield, as it were, is bad products. And it happens more often than not. And we would want, during the PS4 era, I wanted Microsoft to do better. And I was frustrated with them. Like, I was so frustrated. I remember being, after the Xbox One reveal, PS4 reveal was hit out of the park, obviously, and that Xbox One reveal that spring, I was like, holy shit, what the fuck? And yeah, I think I feel that way about Sony in a little bit now, where the advantage continues to be that they have great games and they have better games. I think they have better games overall than Microsoft, but that equation can be answered by internal development. That question can be answered by external acquisitions and mergers and acquisitions, and they're answering the question and they're changing the chemistry. And so I think you're right, Dustin. Sony better be alarmed. Now, what do I think they should do? I think the slow and steady response to ZeniMax was awesome. Like, they're like, oh yeah, we got Housemarque, we got Bluepoint, we got Nix's, and I think pound for pound kind of worked itself out. I mean, ZeniMax has a lot more IP, but I don't think necessarily has more talent than those teams. This Activision move is really devastating, and I think the only thing that makes it less devastating is that Activision had folded so many of those teams, and their cultures into one silo called Call of Duty that gives Microsoft just an advantage there, plus access to IP, but not necessarily to a breadth of teams that give them this massive advantage. So there is a bright spot there. But I think Sony will respond with something big. And it might not be a literal response, but rather they're going to open their minds to possibilities that maybe they weren't considering. And I will say that this let's get away from the, not here on the show, but out there, get away from the small thinking that Sony can't afford things. Sony can afford whatever it wants. Sony can leverage its name and its IP and get loans on anything it wants. It can merge itself with companies. Money is not going to be an object for a company like Sony, because they can say, like, we own PlayStation. We own the Sony brand of electronics. We own all of this shit. Like, we are valuable and we can get the money and pay it back. So I would say don't limit your mind by size, because they could do it. It would just not happen like this. Like, if they were to acquire Activision, that would be like a merger, you know, as opposed to a straight up acquisition. So much to consider here. Again, the personal, the Sony, the Microsoft, the individual, all of that kind of stuff, the industry certainly. But I think that I think that they have crossed the line, and I am not going to support that kind of move, and I'm really going to resist it. And you know who I'm surprised I'm not hearing more from, guys? Although these people don't really exist on Xbox, are the physical games people. Because you know who Microsoft's trying to kill more than anyone? You. So something to keep in mind. Like, they don't give a fuck about physical games. So that's another thing that is interesting. Like, you can't even really make special editions on Xbox because no one buys them. And so hey, keep an eye open. They're coming after some of these different models that are going to be deleterious to the way some of you play games. But I know some of you are excited as well. I'm glad to have gotten that all off my chest. Now I need to marinate and meditate.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I feel like I feel like somebody at Microsoft saw that video a long time ago. It's like, how you share games on PS4, and they were like, yeah,
we'll get you.
We'll get you.
Yeah. Play the slow
That's how it
game.
feels. It feels like a slow, like, it feels like you remember what you said to me in that chat room 14 years ago. I was like,
you killed my father. Prepare to die.
I do want to throw this out here as just kind of a small bright spot. Is I've been covering PlayStation for so long that I remember that the PS3 era, like, it was so bad in the beginning and towards the middle. And the one thing that I'll say is that was fun. If you were a PlayStation fan at that time, just covering games, figuring out what to say, always being on the back foot, everyone making fun of you and demeaning the brand and the product. It's got its own brand of excitement and fun to it that I feel like we're entering that craziness for the next couple of years, where I feel like it's going to be like that. And we'll see at the other end. But so many funny memories and quotes and everything came from that coverage of that era. And I feel like we're getting into that territory. At the same time, I don't want to overreact, because the reality is PlayStation 5 is beating Xbox Series X. That's true. And it's beating it fairly substantially. That's also true. And it's almost impossible to find still. So good signs for Sony, although I'm sure that they would wish that they would be able to sell more, but we'll have to see what happens. And nonetheless, a killing blow by Microsoft, and just a great swing. And we'll see. We'll track it. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Sorry, it's a little late. We wanted to make sure they get this up as opposed to publishing something we already recorded. So that's it. Boys, appreciate your time. As always, appreciate all of you out there for your love, kindness, and support of all things Last Stand and Sacred Symbols. Until next time, goodbye.
See ya.
Take care, guys.
Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast, is a product and trademark of Last Stand Media and Collins Last Stand LLC, and is proudly recorded in the USA. The show is conceived by, is written by, and is directed by me, Colin Moriarty. My co-hosts are Chris Raygun Maldonado and Dustin Furman. The show is produced by executive producer Dustin Furman. It's edited by associate producer Ben Smith. All of Last Stand's theme music is by my best friend, Ramon Narvaez. As you know, all of Last Stand shows, including Sacred Symbols, are fan-funded on Patreon at patreon.com/laststandmedia. The following names are at the producer level on Patreon, our highest tier, and we're grateful for your thoughtful and kind contributions to our independent endeavor. Thank you. Greetings and salutations. Welcome back to Sacred Symbols, a PlayStation podcast. Wait a minute. Let me start again. And Dustin actually cut this one out this time.
I will, because I'm not doing it in a week. I'm not doing the cut a week later.
You can put this at the end, though. All right.
Okay.